Hey, welcome back to the Story Podcast, where we're looking into God's story and how it relates to your story. So what week is this? 15, 16, 18,
We just finished verse
27?
15. Yep.
There's 31 total.
Yeah.
We're at week 15.
We're going to do 2 more weeks, then we're going to take a little summer break.
Yes.
So it's going to be kind of like we finished season 1.
Yeah.
And then you're going to just have to wait for
Season 2.
So.
Don't binge watch it.
Yeah.
Just keep pace with it. I always tell people this is the part of the story, I think where people get lost a little bit. Sometimes it's a little bit like reading through the Bible in a year.
Yeah.
And you get to Leviticus and Numbers and you start to slow down. Well, if you can make it past there, it gets interesting again. But then the Kings and the Chronicles.
Kings are a little tough for me.
Yeah, it can sometimes feel like, what are we doing here?
Right.
And so you brought up on Sunday, obviously, this is a story about a bunch of prophets.
Yes.
And you talked a little bit about that idea of what does a prophet look like, especially as we relate it to today. I think people have such a hard time taking that term, which we have as this like oracle seer who's looking into the future.
Yeah.
But prophet is a little different than that.
Yeah, so prophet, sometimes they tell the future. It's not that they don't tell the future, but they're more like God's spokesperson.
Right.
They're the one that speaks up for God. It's everybody else could be doing their thing, but the prophet is over here bringing the word back. And I think the spiritual New Testament spiritual gift of the prophet is the same thing, someone who speaks on behalf of God.
Yeah.
And I think that's a confusing one in our day today because there's a lot of emphasis on kind of the prophetic word and some of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I think we have to be really careful about that. One, not only to be very faithful to Scripture, but also people use that as a manipulation. And the Lord told me. Sometimes he did, or maybe he did. You just have to be very discerning about that.
Yeah. I just literally today had a conversation on the phone with somebody who said the Lord, it was 2 people and the Lord told him not what the Lord told the other person. And it's like, so the Lord is telling me what he should be telling you. And you're like, yeah, I don't know that that's how it works.
I think the Lord would get confused about that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think one of those things that's hard about that prophetic voice in that moment is it's not hard. It's hard in our culture.
Yeah.
To speak against something that we know.
Yeah.
And lots of times the way that I'll word it is, I'm sure you've run into this, where I'll just say, it's not that you don't like what I'm saying. You don't like what God's saying.
Right.
You don't like what the word so clearly says about this topic, right?
Yeah.
And how do we speak into culture when it's difficult like that, especially countercultural?
Yeah, I think, it's important that the church has that prophetic voice. They should stand out as different, even if it's going to rub people wrong. But I think maybe where it's gotten a little out of tilt lately is, the church has to have the actions that match with it too.
Yeah.
You can say whatever your stance of truth is, but if you say it in a way that, I don't know, that people aren't receiving it, that's not the right way. There needs to be love with that.
Yeah.
I think of Jesus this way, and I think of Jeremiah as the weeping prophet.
Yeah, right.
And he's kind of like, it hurts me to tell you the truth because I love you so much, but I'm going to tell you the truth.
Right.
And that to me is maybe the more, prophetic voice that the church should have these days.
Well, and when you have that prophetic voice I don't want to jump ahead too much, but Amos obviously implores us to, care and have compassion and look out for the needy and the downtrodden. And when you're not doing that and you just have a prophetic voice, well, you sound like a jerk.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's no power in your...
Absolutely, yeah. So let's talk about a few of these prophets that we hit on Sunday. Some of them are great and epic. Elijah is one of those epic prophets.
Yeah.
And you didn't even really get to Elisha, which is sort of the double portion of Elijah even.
Yeah, there's 2. There was just too much to do in one sermon. But Elisha, more... I could be saying this wrong. I think there's as many miracles. There's the miracles of Elijah and Elisha are grouped together as much as any of the miracles in the Bible.
Yeah,
there's more. I think there's more in Jesus' day, of course.
Yeah,
but
Old Testament.
Yeah, so and it's a little bit hard to know what to do with some of them.
Right.
But like the one that we looked at on Sunday of the confrontation with the prophets of Baal is just an awesome.
It's an epic story. Yeah. If anybody who likes big movie scenes has that one in their mind, right?
Yeah.
And the root of that whole thing is this idea of idols. There was this very rampant idol worship of both Baal and Asherah, right? You talked a little bit about that on Sunday, and I think a little bit like the word prophet gets lost in our modern culture.
Yeah.
I think the idea of idols, I mean, I could put a Giants bobblehead here and say, is this your idol, Glenn?
Yeah.
But we don't. What are those idols that you think people are wrestling with today? What does it look like in our modern day?
I'm just to kind of a little background before I answer that specific question. I think sometimes it's almost easy to read these things and you almost, just being honest, God almost can feel kind of petty, like, oh,
Yeah.
you're going to worship him, not
Yeah.
me.
Right. Yeah.
But God knows us so much, knows that we were made to worship him first.
Right.
And so in those days, they like followed after the statues and there was more to it, the whole sexual cult with
Right.
Asherah
Asherah.
and
Yeah.
even Baal, some of that stuff. There was probably some mixed lusts and things that went into all of that. Um, so I think it's anything that takes the place of God
Right.
in our life.
Right.
And a lot of times you can relate to those negative things, whether it's lust, I think is one, just I think numbing the pain. We see
Yeah.
that with drugs and alcohol,
Right.
materialism.
Yeah.
Um, you know, uh, you know, Materialism. An easy way to think about it is like, where am I putting my hope?
Yeah.
Am I putting my hope even for my future? I want to plan for my retirement, those kind of things. But is my hope in the Lord, or is my hope in checking my 401k or whatever it is?
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
I think the opposite side of that is where's my greatest fear?
Where's my greatest
My
fear?
my greatest fear is usually an indication of where my idol
Yeah.
lays rather than it's in God, because I'm afraid I'm going to lose the 401k,
Right.
or I'm going to lose my wife, or I'm going to lose my job, or
Right.
whatever else it is. And so we struggle with those things that we put on really
Right.
a pedestal of
Yeah.
our life rather
Yeah.
than God.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's just a lifelong battle.
I think it's a lifelong battle. The interesting one that you hit on is family.
Yeah.
But so it's so easy to put your kids on the pedestal because you want the best for them and you want them to be happy and all these things. But honestly, it's not good for our kids to make them an idol in our life. For one, we're not teaching them what needs to be taught about God, but also they're not meant to have that place.
Yeah.
But
It's a lot of responsibility for a
it's
kid.
a lot of responsibility, yeah, to be the most important thing in your life.
Yeah,
And,
absolutely.
we organize our schedule around, running them here and there and get them to this and every activity, and they're going to be this, and I'm
Right.
going to, this is just a classic one, but we told our kids we're not going to play sports on Sunday.
How dare you?
I know.
Yeah.
Well, no, we're going to have something more important. Sports is important. We want you to succeed at sports. Go have fun, live it up, but it's not going to be the most important thing.
Yeah.
And that's just a classic example.
Well,
today.
and when you think about kids who are struggling with that, the moment they let mom and dad down, they get that first B, or they
Yeah.
don't make the travel team.
Right.
Suddenly the whole world is rising and falling on
Right.
their,
Right.
when they're not the center of the world, it's
Right.
like,
Yeah,
you
that's
didn't make
right.
the travel team. That's all
Yeah,
right. You're good.
yeah.
You love that team you're on now, right?
Yeah.
And so you can kind of keep God on the throne of those things. I just know people struggle with that idea of like, we talk about it all the time about how do you put God first,
Mhm.
and we have these socially acceptable idols,
Oh yeah.
whether it's workaholism
Yeah.
or some of those other things where it's like, look at me, I'm climbing the ladder, I'm
Yeah.
winning the game, I'm
Yeah.
stacking cash, whatever
Right.
it is,
Right.
and all of a sudden we feel good about that, and it's like it's still an idol.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know how you do with this, but you and I have the double whammy at that because it's for us. It's
Oh,
like
totally.
church.
Yeah.
Like, and I've had that conversation with God many times in my life. I won't put even church in front of you, or
Yeah.
I won't even put, I want my first love to be God Himself, Christ Himself.
Yeah.
And then the other stuff can come, and the other stuff's important, but it's just so easy to twist it around. I shared that quote. I don't know what John Calvin actually said, but the way it often gets said, John Calvin says that the human heart is a perpetual idol factory.
Yeah.
It just kind of comes out of us.
It does.
We can make all kinds of things an idol.
And it's easy to pat ourselves on the back when everything's trending the right way, but
Yeah.
God doesn't love me or you anymore.
Right.
We've had the ability to be involved with churches at all different sizes
Right.
and flavors, but when they're on the decline, does God love us less?
Yeah.
All right, maybe we need to be smarter. Maybe we need to change strategies or something like that. But it's like,
But
is that my idol?
It's not or ultimately where identity comes from. And so, yeah, I think you're right. Fear, identity,
Yeah.
security, when we start turning to things that are not God for that.
Yeah. So practically,
Yeah.
if you recognize you have an idol in your life, something that's on the pedestal, how do you tear that down?
Mhm.
I mean, how do you move from a position of like, I see it now and I know it's not healthy? What do I do to tear this thing down?
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, I think it's always good to speak that to another person,
Yeah.
to receive the accountability from another person and say, this has gotten twisted out of balance. I need to reprioritize this. But I think of even Jesus, he tells the rich young ruler, go sell everything you have. Like, you know what? If money is a big issue for you, give money away.
Yeah.
Or, if having, a fancy this or that is important to you, buy something less.
Yeah.
So take like a practical step. If, if I don't know, but something like that.
Yeah.
I'm even thinking with your kids, like, you know what? If school is the most important thing in the world, then let's. This is probably
Get a B.
Get a B.
Yeah.
We used to say that to our kids. Shani would say to our kids, she'd say, "Love God, love others, and shoot for C's."
Yeah.
We never wanted our kids to get C's, but the point was, it's not what you're defined by, and that was like a little expression in the Barnes family.
Yeah.
I don't know how it worked, but the idea was take the thing that you're putting your trust in and make it less important.
Yeah.
I think the big one, a classic one, is give something away,
Yeah.
or have a little less.
Yeah, for sure. And that's going to play into Amos in just a second.
That's
I know
right.
one of the things that I struggle with a lot is just productivity, like always being
Yeah.
productive. And so,
Yeah.
I had blow out a knee.
Uh-huh.
And it's like sometimes you just need somebody to say, "Hey, shut it down for a little
Yeah.
while. It's not the end of
Yeah.
the world if somebody else will do it if
Yeah.
you shut it down." And I know there's people that struggle with Sabbath and they struggle with all these other
Right.
things. And I'm probably pointing the fingers at
Yeah.
me more than anybody else. But it's like, how do you just force yourself to do that thing
Yeah.
that you know is good and proper
Yeah.
in God's eyes?
Yeah. But even God's command for Sabbath is such an idol breaking thing, because he's saying you're not going to be the most productive.
Yeah.
All the other people, they're going to work 7 days a week. They're going to be ahead of you.
Yeah.
But take seventh day, and rest. It's that important. And
Yeah.
so if that's a thing, take a Sabbath and put your phone down.
And watch me provide.
Yeah.
So we turn the corner then to Amos.
Yeah.
And Amos is the one that I think in our day and age we struggle with just the tangible of how to.
Right.
Because he's imploring these people that they have this, the way you worded it was this empty religion, right?
Yeah.
This reject empty religion that neglects righteousness and justice for the poor and the needy. And I tell you, and I think you probably relate to this, like as a church leader who gets up every day and thinks about programs and all those other things, like I do not want to create a vehicle for empty religion. But a lot of people are practicing empty religion today. How do you
Away
see that?
from me with your songs.
I know, it's
your
brutal.
festivals. And, absolutely. The church machine. And I'm just talking about kind of in our world of kind of evangelical church in the West. Of like religious experiences, they're super helpful in our life. Religious experiences have led me to God, have led me to connect with God, but they're not the be all end all.
Right.
True worship is more than a song.
And even the rhythms of them, doing it weekly, being involved in a community group, serving somewhere, these things that we preach, it's not about the rote, do it, but the rhythms actually do produce godliness in us.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think we just got to always guard against that. Where again, it's kind of where we're placing our hope in.
Yeah.
You and I face the temptation of, you could preach a great sermon, or what you feel like is a great sermon that's maybe not connected to someone, with someone, or help someone. Or I've preached stuff and I'm like, I have no idea I was all over the place.
And people are like, it changed my life.
It changed my life. But that's the way it's supposed to be. It's not supposed to be. Probably empty religion depends more on the pastor and the stage and the upfront for the success.
Yeah.
And the true religion is going to be more spirit-led. And quite honestly, you can't avoid the words of the prophets that true religion is going to be outside of the walls.
Yeah.
It's going to be, in the way that you care for the poor and the needy among you.
Yeah. And so as a church, we have to guard against that it's not just about the weekly, experience. It's more about how does that prompt people's hearts to live it out outside of the four walls of the church, right? And so I'll ask you this, because it really, the way you brought it up was about like compassion and justice for those that are downtrodden and disenfranchised and whatever else it is. We see these people in our community. How do you encourage people to live that out? You and I are both confronted with that regularly, either on the streets or, or even around the church building. We get a lot of it as people come to the church building. How do you encourage people to step into that in a busy culture where there's a ton of needs?
Yeah. Well, I mentioned, God's specific concern for some certain groups, the poor, the widow and the orphan, the immigrant, specifically. There's other needs as well. But I think all of us should just kind of have our radar up for that. I think that it's so easy to get what's called compassion fatigue. Overwhelmed. I can't help everyone. And you see the person, begging on the street. And does my gift really help them? Is just giving them money pacify me? Not really help them. So you have to think through all that stuff. But again, it's kind of like the idol thing. We should always be caring about someone besides ourselves. honestly, I've been super confronted about this because my next door neighbor is a widow.
Yeah.
And, sometimes I get home and zip in without giving her any thought. And
Yeah.
you know, that's no good,
Yeah, right.
you know?
Yeah, and James obviously talks about true religion is
Right,
this, is to care for the orphan and the
right,
widow. And
yeah.
I
And she
think,
doesn't need necessarily my financial gift or
right.
she needs some time,
Yeah.
some friendship, and
Yeah.
just slow down.
Yeah, and I feel like, boy, we see it all around us at all
And,
times, and it is that idea of like, when do I step into it and when do I not? I know one of the things that's always been on my heart is this idea of like, I've got this sign in my office that says busy. It came from Judd, who said being under Satan's yoke,
yeah,
and it's this idea of like, if you don't have any time, if you don't have any margin in your life, you
right,
absolutely can't step into that,
right,
into those moments.
right.
So how do you create enough margin and willingly, intentionally step into those moments?
Yeah. Well, I think it's good for a lot of us to, if we look at our life and we're like, man, I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm given to a missionary, and that stuff's good, but who am I really showing compassion to? Who am I really taking time for?
Yeah.
I think it's good to think, okay, Lord, this week, would you bring along one person? And trust me, He will,
Yeah.
guarantee.
Yeah.
But again, I think sometimes you think, oh, I've got to solve world hunger.
Yeah.
No, I mean, that'd be great. If you can solve, if that's you, do it.
Yeah.
But if you could help one person,
Yeah.
that's something.
Well, and I always think to myself, I've got all these compassion kids and
Right,
Tanzania kids that we just adopted a
right.
bunch of them, and the funny thing is, you said, well, you give to those kids, and I'm like, those are even on auto draft.
Yeah,
Like, I
that's right.
I don't
That's right.
even
Automatic
think about
withdrawal.
them
Right.
sometimes. I recognize I'm doing something, but honestly, it's the guy that approaches you in the parking lot. It's
Yeah,
the homeless
yeah,
problem that you drive by
yeah,
again and again and
yeah,
again.
yeah. In
Those
some ways, those are harder too,
they
because
are.
I mean, this is way oversimplifying it, but money is probably not the answer for that person. That person needs more compassion, time, care, which is for a lot of us harder to give.
Yeah.
It's easy to give someone a few bucks and move on, and I feel better, and I probably haven't really helped them.
Right.
When I was always, I don't know if I was taught this, I don't know where I got this, but it's, I always, even if I don't give something, which I hardly ever give money on the street these days.
I don't either.
But if I can, I always stop. I always, if it's appropriate, put your hand on someone, just give them a little touch, and
Yeah.
try to use a name, something like that.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff maybe is of more value than a few bucks.
I had somebody not that long ago. Really, the thing that people need more at the very beginning is to be seen,
Yeah. Right.
to be greeted,
Yeah.
to be treated like a person, even if
Right.
there's someone who's sort of down and out, and you just have that moment where you actually
Right.
interact with
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
Whether it leads
Hey,
to
what's your name is
yeah,
one, because
yeah,
they're not just a problem, they're a
yeah.
person.
And I think a lot of people struggle with it because they think of people, like you said, solving world hunger or drilling wells in
Mm-hmm.
third world countries. It's like somebody smart and big has started a giant ministry. But you made the comment that Amos was a shepherd and a fig
Yeah, I
farmer.
know. I love that about
Like
him.
at the end of the
Uh-huh.
day, he was a regular guy like you and I,
Uh-huh.
and he's walking around. And so I think that's where we struggle more, is how do I, as a regular person with regular resources, step
Uh-huh.
into a overwhelming
Yeah.
problem,
Yeah.
especially when you think of homelessness
Yeah.
or mental health or drug addiction.
Yeah.
It's like it
Yeah.
feels overwhelming.
I think most of us, if we open our eyes up and really slow down and look, have those people in our lives
Totally.
already. Um, and it may look different because maybe it's not the homeless person, but maybe it's the person in your neighborhood that's going through it or struggling with an addiction, or has an absent parent, and that kid is maybe not an orphan like that, but needs some extra love or needs some extra time.
Yeah.
You know.
My conviction moment for this is a little bit how the church handles this, is that we throw the appropriate resources,
Yes.
energy, and
Yeah.
emphasis to these things
Yeah.
rather than just continuing the I don't want to call it empty religion, because I really don't think we're doing that. But
No.
at the end of the day, it's like, how do we make sure that our emphasis outside the walls
Mhm.
match Christ's heart for a
Yeah.
lost and hurting
Yeah.
world?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Hey, one thing that I just kind of scratched the surface on a little bit on Sunday, but I think it's really good for Christians to think this through in this time that we're in right now, is the immigrant living among
oh
us.
yeah, totally.
Because we're living in a really heightened political season about that, and I think maybe our thinking's being shaped more by the whatever news we watch. Um, and that's fine to have a position politically on immigration. I think it's really important for us to figure that out as a country. But what about the person in front of you?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so how do you treat someone, um, treat someone like Christ would treat them. I think, even I share this a lot, even some of our, Pakistani friends here in this community, I'm curious about them. I want to learn about them. Tell me about you, rather than they're just a name or a different thing. They're a real person.
Yeah.
So,
And God, in His infinite wisdom,
mhm.
has His story create where His people get
Yeah.
carried off a couple of times and
Yeah.
live in a foreign land as a foreigner. And we sometimes overlook that piece where we're like, wait a second, like this was God's people. They were
Yeah.
trying to figure out how to live in these foreign lands and,
Yeah.
plant gardens and,
Yeah.
all the stuff that we're told in the scriptures. And it's like, yeah, we need to have an eye out for those people too. Yeah. Okay, one more. Let's talk about Hosea. The return to the God who will always take you back. I call this the grace, and more grace situation. And I think anybody who's read this story, and even just what we read in the story, this story rubs us wrong.
It does.
Like from the get-go, it rubs us wrong. Why do you think it rubs us so wrong?
Because it's not fair.
Yeah.
We get grace is we get what we don't deserve.
Yeah. Yeah.
Gomer is a scandal.
Yeah.
And she's no good.
Yeah. And not to mention no good, she doesn't even respond
Right.
to like great love and
Yeah.
great, effort and enthusiasm by
Uh-huh.
Hosea. And so one of the things that I keep thinking about is the reason I think it rubs us so wrong is because she keeps returning to this lifestyle,
Right.
continues to sin against Hosea, and we understand like God's forgiveness is unlimited and our forgiveness is supposed to be, but all of us know 70 times 7 is 490, and
Yeah.
at 491 you're done, right?
Yeah.
And so this idea of continuing to forgive someone doesn't sit right with us a lot of the time.
Right. Yeah, because they got to learn their lesson and
Yeah.
those kind of things. And I think you hit on something. One, we need to be able to receive God's grace like that.
Yeah.
But then, how do we begin to show that kind of love to other people, or that kind of grace with other people? That is that unconditional grace. And we're so worried about right and wrong and fair, when I think maybe we're fighting the wrong battle there. And honestly, what's going to help some people is not necessarily that they got treated fair, but they got extended grace even when it wasn't fair.
Yeah. And that grace divide, almost feel like it's a chasm, right? There's people on either side. Those of us who are on this side because we think we're righteous, because we think we've got it all together. But there's a whole group of people that are on the other side that know they don't deserve grace.
Right.
And are having trouble. Like, what do you tell the people who, I think one of the community group questions you wrote this week was this idea, I'm too far gone.
Yeah.
Like, what is God going to do with me? I'm too far gone, right? And we've had conversations with people that feel
100%.
that way.
I've had, yeah.
Yeah. How do you walk them through that idea of like, yeah, there's nobody too far gone.
Yeah. Well, not that I do this, but one way to say is once upon a time there was a man named Hosea.
Yeah, right.
God told him to marry a prostitute.
Yeah, right.
And the prostitute was unfaithful with him, and God said, "Go buy her back."
Yeah, right.
Because that's what I've done for you. So I mean, I think maybe the extremes, and God includes those stories for us to get that.
Yeah.
For us to get that it's the worst offender that you can imagine.
Yeah.
And yet He still loves us.
I feel like over and over again, I will hear people talk about either high-profile Christians or leaders or whatever that have taken a fall.
Right.
And we see it in the story of David. We see it in Solomon. Like, this is just recent memory in the story, right? And we see that again and again. And then we always act surprised.
Yeah.
Every single time we act surprised.
Yeah.
Like, how could that be?
He was
how
God's
could that
person,
happen?
man.
Yeah, he was so influential.
Yeah.
And it's like, and I don't, I have said this for years about not only the ministry, but also about my marriage. Like, when you get to the point where you think it can't happen to you, you've already got one foot in trouble, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You've got to always think, this could happen to me. And how will I respond in that moment? Will I be able to offer grace to others because I could see it happening to me? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, one of my life verses is my heart is sinful, wicked above all things.
Yeah, right. And then people act surprised when you're like, oh, yeah,
no, it says
that's
it right
what it
there in the
says,
Bible.
right? Yeah, absolutely. So, and then I guess the root question becomes, how do we become the kind of people that will extend that kind of grace, the kind of grace that Hosea?
Yeah.
I sort of think when I hear this story that Hosea is kicking and screaming, like, why would you make me, God?
Yeah.
But at some point, does Hosea come around to be the kind of person that would extend that grace again and again? Because I think that's what God is trying to hatch in all of us, right?
Right.
How do you become that kind of person who extends grace again and again and again?
Yeah. Well,
other than parenting.
Yeah. Right. I mean, the obvious answer for the Christian is you recognize that's what you've received, so that's what you give. But I think we just have to get over ourselves. and get over our pride that thinks we've got it all together and we're the keeper of right and wrong and we're the keeper of justice. No, we're sinners saved by grace, and so that's all we've got to offer to others too.
And when others sin against us, we need to have that attitude, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You
'Cause, when someone sins against us, it's so easy to be defensive. And,
yeah.
it's something I've
It's the
trying to work
first thing
on
you
to
do.
not be defensive.
Yeah.
But that's so not a godly attitude.
Yeah. You said something earlier, compassion fatigue.
Yeah.
And it's easy to look at all three of these areas and go, we have idol fatigue,
Yeah.
where we just don't see the idols in our life
Yeah.
anymore. We have compassion fatigue, where we see so many needs, we don't know what to do about it. And even like this, I would call it like a grace fatigue, where we're like, I'm just exhausted of showing you grace anymore. I just want to be done with you at this point. And yet God, we see, calls us to overcome that fatigue and say, no, this is who we're supposed to be in these environments.
Yeah. Don't grow weary in doing good is
That's right.
a great scripture, You're doing good, but don't grow weary in it. And I think the other thing to remember is, honestly, the Israelites don't really succeed in any of those things.
No.
They fail in all of them
Again and again.
And judgment comes.
Yeah.
The nation's basically destroyed.
Yeah.
So we can choose God's way.
Yeah.
Or we can choose the painful way.
Yeah. Well, and you end up with just one prophet left.
Right.
And it's like there's only one guy speaking for God, and God's gonna prevail. His message is always gonna be proclaimed. So that's good stuff. Let me ask you one personal question.
Bring it.
If you hear these three stories, which of these fatigues do you think either you're facing the most or our culture is facing the most right now? Like of idol fatigue or compassion fatigue or even that idea of grace fatigue? And I just made up those words.
Yeah, no, they're good ones. I like it. It's hard for me to say as a culture because I think honestly we face all of those.
Yeah,
that idolatry thing is obviously pretty big. I think for me, I just in reading and preparing the sermon, I was really confronted by the compassion for the poor and the hurting.
Amos piece.
And we're in the religion business, and that's not the answer. The answer is love God, show mercy to other people, show compassion, and that's the true religion. And so I think I was just really confronted by that. Even as I think about financially, we plan our giving and we do that. Like you said, I'm compassionate on auto pay, which is good. That is,
there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, but what about taking time for that person in front of you? I think so. I think that's the one that was most confronting to me.
Yeah.
So
and
I have to admit, partly because I've had some conversations with some people, I've been hurting for the immigrant.
Yeah.
That are saying, gosh, right or wrong, they're saying, we just feel like our world's really unstable right now.
Yeah.
So I've been trying to show just a little extra compassion.
Yeah.
When I can.
Yeah, I feel like that's the same one for me, and maybe for different reasons. When God lands you in a specific spot, and for many of the people watching, they've got families to raise. They're whatever else it is, they're in their own little world, and they've got their own little world to make an impact on, which I genuinely believe that to be true. But there's times where you're like, well, why can't I just sell everything and go be Mother Teresa to the poor on the streets of Calcutta? And it's like, how do I wrestle with my place and my position right now versus the real tangible needs? We watch this Access Center go through some change in leadership in the city and all the stuff that's going on with that, and we think, it's a real problem. Like and how do we step into it? And we're happy to, as a church, and frankly, you've said it before, to whom much is given, much is expected. And it's like, to shovel money that way is a good and proper thing that I think we should do. But there's this idea of, how do I step into it personally?
Hey, one tiny thing, and I mentioned it on Sunday or just briefly, but I think parents, grandparents, memorize those verses. Don't only just memorize the verses about God's love for you, do those, but memorize that, let justice roll down like a mighty river and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. And God defends the cause of the fatherless and the widow and the orphan. So those are good memory verses.
Yeah, and even for parents, your kids are going to remember far more the time that you stopped and helped somebody on the street than they are the Sunday school lesson they had. And I say that with
100%.
Yeah, they're just are going to see that and internalize that in such a way. I heard somebody just this week say, probably the most important thing we can do with our kids is let them watch us worship God. And it's like, that's not like a showy fake thing, but if they see us worshiping God, then they know, oh, this is real in my dad's heart. Well, if they see us dealing with the oppressed and the poor and the marginalized, they will say, oh, that's part of who we are as Christians.
That's really what all this is about. Be real.
Yeah.
Be real with God.
Absolutely. So Hope you're enjoying.
I'm convicted. I'm in.
I'm on. Yeah. Hope you're enjoying the story. We've got a few more weeks before we take a break for the summer.
Yes.
But we're excited that you're following along with us. We're going to continue the podcast through the story episodes. We know we're hitting summer here. Some of the community groups take a break and some other stuff, but we're going to keep podcasting until we're into the summer months. And so looking forward to continuing the story with y'all.